and welcome to Get the Table, another wrestling roundtable discussion podcast with myself, Adam Wilborn, and the Dadley Boyz from WhatCulture, here to discuss another burning wrestling issue. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts, where we review Raw, SmackDown, the Wednesday Night War between AEW and NXT, pay-per-views, we have interviews, more roundtable discussions like this one, and a roundup of the week, complete with a bloody good quiz, of course, on WrestleCulture. But as I said, I'm joined by Michael Sidgwick and Michael Hamflett. And gents, we are gathered here today to talk about the face of WWE. And more specifically, who should be the next face of WWE? We've had Roman Reigns, of course. Seth Rollins, it could be argued, is slowly dwindling away as the face of WWE. So who should be the next in line going forward?
Nobody.
Is that your answer?
Yeah.
Well, let us know your thoughts. No, it's interesting. It's an interesting point that you raise because times are consistently changing within the wrestling industry, arguably faster than ever, and having a definitive face a la John Cena probably isn't really a thing anymore in 2019.
I mean, it is with Seth Rollins, but because of Seth Rollins, I don't think it should be. Like, being at the top face of WWE sends an instant message to the fandom. This is the guy we want to get behind. And when WWE wants to get behind a guy, they will shove him so far down your throats that the worldwide price of foie gras will skyrocket. It is a ridiculous antiquated notion that doesn't get anybody over. John Cena was a machine at this. He was fantastic at this. Roman Reigns, in retrospect, is very good at this because he isn't Seth Rollins. And there's kind of a creeping notion that there's a law of diminishing returns that, I mean, what purpose does this role actually serve? You're getting the top babyface push. You can do that without having to be the face of the company. Mm-hmm. But it's just a really, when you think about it and scrutinize, it's a really dick-headed way of Vince McMahon to parrot company rhetoric through an ostensibly popular voice, so that rhetoric becomes more palatable. And if you can't maneuver it, or if you're not a complete machine like John Cena was, you will get turned heel quicker than getting booked by WWE if you are forced to parrot that messaging. It is, in my opinion, a poison chalice, and they should just simply produce a better product rather than have some poor bastard try and make the product look better than it is and just get ruthlessly bantered off on social media and elsewhere for having to do this impossible job that should not exist. Michael Hamflett, who do you think should be the face of WWE?
Well, is that fair? As in, it just strikes me that there's no more organic face of the WWE. It's kind of impossible. Like you say, the moment that they recognize a trend and latch themselves onto it, it's a bit like when your parents start liking your favorite band. You're like, guess they're not cool anymore now.
It's 100% fair, what Sidgwick said. Like, the answer to the question, who should be the next face of WWE, in my opinion, is the last one, Roman Reigns, because already Seth Rollins' run has made me feel like, you know what, Roman wasn't doing such a bad job. He was, because it's a thankless, and, it's a thankless task, an unwinnable role, poison chalice, whatever you want to call it. What I really don't get about WWE still searching for that face and that character is that they've tried so hard, and it was under the umbrella of John Cena being on top, to make the brand the top star. And yet they're obsessed with what they themselves have made an outdated metric. Top stars outside of WWE, that's not an outdated metric. Like, top stars can still draw money. Chris Jericho's proven that with New Japan, and is starting to prove it in AEW, I even think, as Le Champion. Like, what he's doing here is he's making himself a star all over again in a product that currently, in a landscape that currently doesn't really reward stars in North America. WWE made it that way, and did so with John Cena. And I think what happened with Cena was he fooled Vince McMahon and he fooled the company at large into assuming that you need to have one. And my worry is that they'll continue down that path and more guys will get buried. There will be more Seth Rollins. I think Becky Lynch has done a remarkable job to appear as if she's still a top star in spite of booking working against her. The fact that we're in November now, she won the title at WrestleMania. She was pushed around this time last year. Not, the initial start of the man was all very accidental, wasn't it? Everything from about this time last year onwards, she was pushed as, and is still received as a top star. And I think that's staggering that she's managed to do that. The only top faces that are ever going to be top faces in the audiences are never going to be the chosen one of WWE because that is exactly what creates the disconnect with the audience.
The age-old thing is always about grabbing the brass ring, and that's how you get yourself out there and get yourself recognised by the appropriate people within the company to get that push. Is it arguable now that people almost don't want to grab that brass ring because they know that the moment that they do, like you say, you become this face and you become this mouthpiece for Vince McMahon, and in reality, like, it's more than a poison chalice. It is a definitive way to get the fans to turn on you because you become a corporate puppet almost.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's got to a point now where if you get pushed to this level, you're almost guaranteed to fail. Like, dare I say it, Hamflet, do you think even Cody would turn heel if he was at this point presented as the face of WWE?
Sorry, turn heel. CM Punk called the brass ring mythical as early as 2011, didn't he? He was a guy that saw then, back when there was still a chance that you could get pushed just for being the best and the biggest star. He saw even then that system was starting to fail. Guys like him and guys like Daniel Bryan, and the list goes on and on of people that were kind of struggling to break out from underneath Cena at the time. That's 9 years ago, and it's only gotten worse since then. I think that the days of, we've talked about this on other podcasts before, I kind of pine for the days of the Attitude Era locker room where guys were trampling on each other's heads to get the next best opportunity. I wish there was a Bob Holly in the locker room to slap some sense into the likes of Seth Rollins or even Roman Reigns for accepting the big dog segment on SmackDown. I think he said it, Cedric, when we were talking about this over the desks, as daft as that was. Ultimately, you could think worse of Roman Reigns for just saying yes to it. So then your perception, regardless of what they're doing on screen, your perception of them off screen diminishes because you're looking and thinking, if you really believe in yourself, why would you say yes to this? If you really are the top face of WWE, use that stroke for the good of the product and the good of your position.
Right, let's get into who could be the next face of WWE then. One name that immediately leaps to mind is the current NXT champion, of course, Adam Cole, who's been heavily featured in this build towards Survivor Series. But he has this edge about him that we kind of associate with all acts coming up from NXT that you're a little bit worried that may get, the edges may be smoothed over when they get, I'm not going to say called up because NXT's not that place anymore.
Don't upset Tommy Shammer.
When they get transitioned over to Raw or SmackDown.
I would be astonished if the process of hooking Adam Cole up to a Kool-Aid IV drip isn't underway already. If you notice the pattern with what they're doing with that man at the minute, it's actually quite worrying for me as a fan of his and as someone who's a big critic of the role of face of the company to begin with. He's working through a wrist injury that is significant enough for him to have a cast on his arm. He is, on Wednesday, scheduled to wrestle a ladder match so that he can lead his team into a War Games match on Saturday night, after which he will wrestle a traditional 5-on-5-on-5, that's not really traditional, but you know what I mean, match on Sunday. They're working him quite literally to the bone. He's been put on backstage as the beaming face of this new NXT brand that we're all supposed to get on board with. He is the face of NXT, so it's kind of worrying for me on a macro level that they are sort of replicating the way it's done on the main roster in NXT already. He is a goddamn handsome man. He is incredibly likable. I watched a documentary on his as part of a wider series of documentaries, and the name of the filmmaker escapes me. I will write it on the Twitter underneath the post for this podcast. They are wonderful, wonderful series of documentaries. He comes across as just the most likable guy. The same likable guy that everyone insists Roman Reigns is, and has become apparent after he was no longer in that role. So long story short, Adam Cole is perfect for this deeply imperfect role, but I worry that people loved Seth Rollins in 2015, 2016, and were very, very hurt when he himself got hurt with that sort of career-altering knee injury. But Adam Cole, as things stand, good-looking, very articulate, very clever, very nice, very marketable, incredibly talented, 30 years of age, I believe. I think he's still like a pup by pro wrestling standards. For better or worse, he is very, very, very much meeting the remit of face of that company.
Vince McMahon's legacy for draining the cool out of guys once they become his chosen one as well is like starkly apparent when you think of someone like Adam Cole. Like
from boom to boo.
Yeah, I think like he's just.
I was saying boom. You know what I mean? I can readily imagine myself tweeting some bollocks like that in about 2 years' time.
It's the worst. I think when he came out on SmackDown, they didn't even time his entrance out as such to be as we see on NXT because Vince is running SmackDown and he just doesn't know it exists as such. You know, once he sees it play out in a takeover, that might change. I can date all the way back.
He's too busy watching NXT UK.
I can go back to like two of my all-time favorites and watch how, as top-line babyfaces, everything that got them over in the first place was sucked out of them once they held the belt. In Diesel and Shawn Michaels, like back-to-back, Vince McMahon had his top guy, had everything he loved about him, and then found ways to kind of get him wrong. And he didn't draw money, and the stars felt weaker as a result in Vince's hands compared to what it was that kind of got themselves over in the first place. I'm not suggesting that Adam Cole has got himself over completely. It would be a discredit to the NXT system and to the coach, and he credits Shawn Michaels and Triple H with
And
giving him
PWG and ROH.
all of his career, the whole career, like an indie background, all of it. You know, there's a lot that's made Adam Cole to the point he's at. I do worry significantly when I see him matched up against WWE guys that
I'm being the elite.
the size of his arms would let him down anyway once he got there. I know that sounds really flippant, and I know that there has been smaller guys that have been given a chance, but I'm not so sure. I think everything about him, until he tries to do a double bicep, makes me think he's a Vince McMahon guy. And then I look at him and I think, well, when Vince actually goes for him and pairs him against somebody on the main roster, like, let's say, a Sheamus or a Cesaro, he's like, oh, I'm pushing this little guy. Nah, forget that. And then once the floor drops out underneath Adam Cole, is there any way back from him? He's a guy that is... And this happens a lot. Guys in WWE reach the precipice and then you never realize how thin that ice is. It's like once they're on top, you're worried, well, when's the ice going to melt? When's the sort of floor going to fall out beneath them? Cole is a guy that can't afford to be booked like that. He's got to remain, I say, the coolest guy in the room, the guy that thinks he's the coolest guy in the room. And I do worry about that under Vince McMahon's pencil.
You know what I don't worry about? Who is he the doppelganger of?
Shawn Michaels.
Who did Vince McMahon famously want to shag in the 1990s?
Shawn Michaels. But look at Shawn Michaels in the 1990s. Great arms. Like, really great biceps. I know he didn't fail a test. Yeah, I know what he believed, but he used to have great arms.
He used to have fantastic arms. Unbelievable.
There's two names that we've got to mention next who arguably, if anyone is going to be able to break the mold of what it means to be the face of WWE, it's going to be the Velveteen Dream or Matt Riddle. Certainly because Matt Riddle does not always toe the party line.
I've got kind of a massive theory as it pertains to Matt Riddle. He's been sent from another dimension to fit every single last criteria that Vince McMahon values in a top man, in a top babyface. And I think it's a test from some sentient, like, benevolent overlord to think, if he screws up this guy that I've created, then that's it. The party's over. WWE's gone forever. Like, think of every quality that Matt Riddle has. He's got fantastic hair. He's shredded. He wears that massive beaming smile that he has to tell other people to wear because he values it so much. Matt Riddle just wears it by default because he's such a happy-go-lucky, breezy, happy 420 guy, whatever you want to call it. He's great at this, and I think it's kind of understated how much Vince McMahon values actual in-ring work. Now, I know he pushed Jinder Mahal. I don't think he ever had any intention of taking them all the way to WrestleMania or, like, much less multiple WrestleManias. He values good in-ring work so much that I think it's one of the reasons why he won't go all the way on Braun Strowman. It's the reason why he literally tore off his headset in 1995 and said that British Bulldog and Diesel were disgraces to the chosen profession.
Horrible was the word he used.
Horrible.
Stormed
He
off.
is completely soured on people after the strength of one match. Not one of these horrendous promo segments that he puts these guys through. He's soured on guys through the stasis of one match. Matt Riddle is a dynamite, incredible pro wrestling performer. He's got a disposition that I think Vince McMahon would clearly be, like, drawn to. He just does not give he just doesn't. He's got it in him to sort of say no, which Vince McMahon loves. A guy with a backbone. He's got a marketable, legit sporting background that has put someone like Brock Lesnar in his esteem, in his favor forevermore. I don't think there's a single quality that Matt Riddle doesn't have that Vince McMahon would be like, I'm not sure about this guy. He's got it all. He's a Vince McMahon checklist of a performer. And if it's not plainly true now, if he somehow manages to botch Matt Riddle, I don't think I can do this job anymore. I can't in any way go in good faith and say, maybe this will be good. I mean, I barely do it already. Matt Riddle is my last thin connection to what I think that man is capable of.
I love Matt Riddle, and I think I can completely agree with what you say there. I think it would have to be a concerted effort by Vince McMahon to turn me on him. You know, Seth Rollins is the prime example everyone goes to at the moment, and our very own Adam Nicholas was a huge proponent of Seth Rollins and has slowly been turned more and more, and certainly in 2019, any candle he was holding for him has completely gone out now.
Did Seth Rollins burn him down?
Indeed. But it would have to be something. I mean, you'd have to strip his character back and rebuild it completely.
Put him on the main roster for the first time and cast him as a bully. You'd have to do something
He's done it already.
Like that.
He's done it already.
Riddle, wouldn't you? You know, I'm being a little bit flippant there because what that did tell you, if you try and ever get into Vince McMahon's mad mind, is that he saw him as like a big jock babyface. That's how he perceives Matt Riddle. Him and Keith Lee walk in the room, and then Vince has been like, I've been sick of all these little NXT guys that Triple H keeps telling me about. And then these big lads turn, he's like, I get it. Pummel the little guy, pummel Sami Zayn. So in his mind, that probably works in our benefit as Matt Riddle fans because he sees him as somebody that could be his top guy. I agree with Sidgwick. I think like in the post Brock Lesnar era especially, I think that looks good for Riddle's chances more than it did before. All of those little things that are kind of counterculture that previously wouldn't have like sold with WWE's mainstream audience have been obliterated by the MMA involvement of Brock Lesnar and Ronda Rousey.
As Dave Meltzer says, what demographic are they going after now? The teens? Matt Riddle is huge on teenage boys. Remember that tweet? It's absolutely fantastic. So, Jamie, I'm wrapping up a serious point with a bit of trademark.
He would be
snark.
good for the demo, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he'd absolutely be great for the demo. Apparently, he's the one like thing that separates NXT from AEW in that demo. They're just huge on teenage boys.
Moving swiftly on, we mentioned Velveteen Dream as well.
Yeah, it's all there. It's what's great about Velveteen Dream is that he's quite clearly unfinished, and I like that. Like all the excitement that you get in one of his takeover matches, especially, and then every now and then you just see the little bit of the cracks in his work, or on the NXT TV shows, he doesn't necessarily feel quite as big in Full Sail when really he should feel even bigger. But I quite like that because it's almost like he suits that bigger crowd. He suits the sports entertainment mold that the Performance Center clearly teaches. He finds the guy in the back row, and there's just something so fabulous and entertaining about him. He strikes me that he would pass Vince McMahon's airport test because he's got that natural charisma and that natural flamboyance that if he walked past you, he's about 6.5 foot tall, and you would just look at him and think, oh my God. Like he's a checklist wrestler to me for Vince McMahon.
From personal experience, I've seen, friends of mine who are casual fans or disillusioned years ago with WWE and haven't watched it for a while, and you show them not even necessarily a huge amount of a Velveteen Dream match, but just anything associated with Velveteen Dream, and he is fascinating in terms of capturing the imagination of lapsed fans. Let's just say he's the dream. Well, pun not intended there, but he's the ideal person for something like that.
Yes, absolutely. I've said something along these lines several times, so forgive me for repeating myself. You won't forgive me for the cynicism because NXT is a sacred cow. Over the years, my wider enthusiasm for NXT has diminished because I feel like it's got a bit of a nerve presenting as is all of these PWG guys and just saying, right, well, they're not going to develop here, but we created them here because we're the little brand that could. That kind of annoys me. There's kind of a soulless aspect to it. Velveteen Dream for me is proof positive that they know how to create stars still, and he has created himself by just fashioning this absolutely wonderful, alluring, idiosyncratic performer that he is. I just love him, and I think that I hear the words, I just love the Velveteen Dream. I've heard various complaints, sometimes from my own mouth, about his green ring work and his lack of instincts, particularly when he throws a clothesline. It looks like you're just doing that to miss. There's still refinement in his work, but he's still like 24 years old, I
24.
think. 24.
Right out of Tough Enough. He's a perfect story if he makes it to the top.
He looks like he was born to be in the entertainment industry, unlike a lot of guys who I adore who feel like they're playing at it. He looks like he was born to do something like this, if not this. Yeah, it's the same old story. How do you screw up Velveteen Dream? Smash cut to.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Finn Balor here, because he's had this sensational reinvention in NXT. But he was someone who, a few years ago, we'd have sat around this table, especially following SummerSlam, and said, this is it now. This is the guy. And it just hasn't really worked for him for the reasons we've probably alluded to earlier on. But could this rehabilitation in NXT perhaps bring him back to where he was? Because he was one of the most talked about people when he made that transition to NXT, of course, and when he made that leap up to the main roster and was given such a rocket straight away, he was someone who a lot of people's eyes would have been on.
He doesn't look it, but he's a bit old, I think, for the role. I don't think he is. I think you can look at bloody AEW, bingo. You can get a 50-year-old to be the ace of a company. You know, age is immaterial. It's all about how fresh and alluring the character is. Finn Balor's new character is incredibly alluring. I just think, realistically, Vince McMahon kind of sees him as a busted flush. I'd argue that Finn Balor is using that perception as a busted flush to shape and drive and inform how sort of pissed off and ornery this new character is. I think the strength of this character is bred from what he was. And what he was not something that Vince McMahon was particularly interested in.
To that end, would you include Johnny Gargano as well?
Absolutely, but much worse than Finn. And that's not, I love Johnny Gargano's work, and it's no disrespect to him, but if you look at a guy like Finn, who hasn't got height, let's say, but is cut. Johnny Gargano hasn't got height, but is cut. The one thing like that probably separates them in Vince McMahon's mind is the Demon. Like that, it was a character that was designed perfectly for WWE to sell toys, to sell shows, to sell to kids, to sell to adults. There wasn't really an audience that probably wouldn't have enjoyed seeing the Demon live or being a part of it. Or being
My wife hates him.
Or being a part of that character.
Seriously, she hates him.
But like, he's a busted flush to Vince, I think more so than Gargano, because he injured himself as soon as he won the title. I don't think Vince ever got over the fact that, like, and it wasn't his fault. Obviously, injuries happen, but I just think that first night, and he's actually put faith in him, and he's gutted it out, and he's got through the match, and it's probably everything that the old guys would have told you have to do as WWE champion, Universal champion, and he had to give the belt up. And I don't think Vince ever got over that, and I don't think there's no face paint and toy selling, you know, kind of gimmick that would have got him over that line. Gargano, I love him, and he's got even less than that through the prism of Vince McMahon and what he believes you need to be a top guy. Ciampa stands more of a chance because he looks more physically imposing. But I don't think that Gargano even gets the takeover quality matches week on week on Raw. I think one of the best things that ever happened to him was Ciampa's injury, taking the pair of them away from that weird pre-WrestleMania NXT call-up glut, because he was able to go back into the NXT world and solidify himself there as a potential lifer. I think even he knows that. I don't think he'd stay so hard into the Mr. NXT thing without realising the dangers that await him on Raw and SmackDown. I think he probably looks at his career and thinks, as long as I can get a bit of a pay rise now that NXT's on USA, I'll take this and then transition it into a performance centre role. Why, if you are Johnny Gargano, looking at how some of your peers have fared or some guys that are just like you, what is there in it for you to get that progression?
Yeah, there's no clear path to becoming the face. Any other names you'd like to mention here?
I think there's a theme has developed throughout this podcast, and any name that is on the tip of my tongue is down there in the NXT system. Adam Cole, NXT star. Velveteen Dream, NXT star. Matt Riddle, NXT star. Finn Balor reinvented himself in NXT. Johnny Gargano, face of NXT. It's telling that we did not think to bring up as a point of discussion anyone currently on that main roster. And why do we think that? It's because there's so many systemic institutional issues within that main roster that no one, in my opinion, can successfully be the face of it as long as Vince McMahon is in charge.
There is one for me, and I think we're probably all the same names kind of ruffle through our brain there, the likes of Humberto Carrillo and Cedric Alexander and the like. I think there is one that can always break out because he survived a dodgy call-up, he survived storylines, and you never know what he's got physically, and that's Ricochet. Ricochet, for me, like, gets booked into the ground on Raw because Raw can be so boring. Ricochet isn't boring. He's just part of this very boring tapestry of pro wrestling. If he got drafted onto SmackDown, he would eventually get sucked into that vortex as well. And yet, you are only ever really one Ricochet match away from thinking he's the best thing in wrestling. I didn't care for last year's War Games, but the only thing I remember from it is that Ricochet spot, and people talked at length about it. One of the best tag team matches I've seen in real life, and one of the best I've seen in the last few years, featured Ricochet in a makeshift tag team with Aleister Black against the now Viking Raiders, because he's just so malleable to kind of any situation that WWE put him in. I'm not suggesting that those AJ Styles matches are worth rewatching, but if pushed, then the matches start to matter. If, say, Ricochet had another decent year on the main roster, and this time next year we're talking about him as a potential candidate for a Royal Rumble winner, very quickly you can start putting him in the WrestleMania mix, and all those moves matter a great deal more than they do on any given week. I just think he's got so much more about him because of his freakish athleticism. And as good as the main roster has ever been, like ricochets on another. The things he can do are just things that others can't, and you need like a USP like that, I think, to even stand a chance.
The wild card rule is dead in WWE, but not here. I'm going to throw a name at you right now. Considering you said about older stars who've had the experiences, and obviously with Jericho and AEW, CM Punk. I realise he's not stepping between the ropes anytime soon, but in terms of a face of your brand and the redemption story that WWE would like to package that with, is that something that ever could be feasible?
I don't know when this podcast is scheduled, but you are either about to see or you have seen pop up on your YouTube channels a video entitled The Disturbing Truth Behind a CM Punk In-Ring Return. My thoughts there are in depth. The sister article is available on whatculture.com now.
That was very slick.
Thank you very much.
Just when
I
Adam
learned from the best.
Just when Adam Wilborn asked the question, you changed the what culture.
Dick. You've put us off my thing now with a pop. I just can't see it.
No.
It'd be the weirdest thing if they somehow contrived to normalize him. I think it would have to be on the same part-time deal he always resented. And even that, if he operates in that capacity, that twinned with the odd creative misstep, even something as great as Becky Lynch's rise to WrestleMania, let's not forget, was marred by weird angles. They would never consistently book one program with CM Punk in a faultless way. And that second week promo was a bit repetitive, or they did some really weird tacked on car angle. I think all of the sort of creeping sentiments about CM Punk's character would kind of surface a bit, and it would just come down to the fact that it's all bollocks what he said. And it's absolutely fine. He was never going to change that system. It was such an admirable goal for him to have, and it was beaten out of him. I just think ultimately that is never a good fit.
There's a magnificent WrestleMania program in CM Punk if he wants it, if the company fancy booking it. You know, that as a bottled thing would be sensational. I was just about to say, such as Batista earlier this year, but even that succumbed a little bit to some drab television along the way. But yeah, there's a one-stop program with CM Punk, but I wouldn't say as a long run. A performer of a similar age to him, who it feels like a short, sharp shock of a top face run, but only because Vince McMahon quite clearly has a bit of a thing for it at the moment, is Shayna Baszler. I just look that she's probably not got ages left, but she's, I would argue, an even more authentic version of Becky Lynch is the man. She's as authentic as Ronda Rousey, and we look how successful she was in that one incredible year on top that must have given Vince McMahon the faith to go with the women's main event. I love Charlotte and Becky, but we know how influential Ronda was in that for her. I wonder if all this enthusiasm he's currently got for her, once presumably she ends up on Raw or SmackDown, they could maybe get 1 or 2 years out of her, because now finally he seems to have a little bit of faith in putting actually women on the top of his cards. Becky Lynch has sustained it far more than Seth. So over the last 12 months, there's no argument which one of his top baby faces has ended up in better health. So maybe Shayna. I can't see her really operating outside of this incredible heel role as she is at the moment, but if there's talent within her, and there clearly is, she can probably unlock that and just do that against heels instead.
Absolutely. Well, let us know your thoughts on who you think should be the next face of WWE in the comment section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts. Plus, you can let us know your thoughts on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. Watch there, follow all three of us. You can follow Michael Hamflett at
Michael Hamflett.
Follow Michael Sidgwick at
I'm telling you now, if they fail Matt Riddle, there's no chance they'll do anything right. Go on the AEW train at Sidgwick. Also, you can look out for my article exposing the AEW bias myth. That is available to read on whatculture.com/WWE at Sidgwick.
Follow me at...
It's a long handle, that.
Follow me at Adam Wilborn. Follow us all at What Culture WWE, as I said. This has been Get the Table. My thanks to the Dadley Boyz. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.